Dujut, Nalagshona. Uh, Welcome to Irish Granny Tarot and Merry Christmas. I decided what the heck. I'm going to do it. So here I am, and congratulations if you are brave enough to sit through this on Christmas Day. However, I figured, there's probably a lot of people out there who are like us and are really not getting together in groups this year, or people who scheduled flights on Delta last night and are at home now. That's terribly disappointing. So I thought I'd do at least one video. I got up this morning and I looked out the window and it was snowing, which doesn't happen really frequently here. When we first moved here 40 years ago, it snowed every winter and it came all the way up to my thighs. And I'm 5'3". At least I used to be. Now we're lucky if we get snow at all, ever. Not lucky, but it's unusual if we get snow. It's not my favorite thing. In fact, you really know you're getting old when you look out the window on Christmas morning, you see the snow, and instead of thinking, oh, we're having a white Christmas, you think, oh my God, I hope I don't slip and break a hip. So anyway, here we are, stuck in the house. It's very quiet. My husband gave me a lovely present. We weren't going to give presents. His birthday is the week before Christmas. Terrible timing. Two great stories. This is going to be a little less formal today. His family is not communicative. And he's the third of five. And the year he was born, his grandparents received a Christmas card from his parents that said, Merry Christmas from mother and father, first child, second child, and then his name. And the grandparents called them up and said, who is this? Did you guys get a dog? They said, oh no, we had a baby. They just didn't tell them. They wanted it to be a surprise. And they didn't tell them for 9 months. Blows my mind. But anyway, so he gave me a really nice present as a surprise. Now he's been doing this project during the lockdown because, as I mentioned before, I know. Oh, by the way, I put this really close to my mouth. Now people are going to complain it's too loud. I'm trying everything, you guys. So let's hope this works. So at the beginning of the pandemic, because he was 70, now he's 71, because he was 70 and because he has a stent in his heart, he doesn't care if I talk about it, and he worked in a clinical hospital, clinical laboratory. My daughters and I went on an unmerciful campaign to get him to quit. Now, this wasn't something that we had planned on doing or could afford to do. We may have to eat our dogs yet. At least we can stuff poor Scarlet, right? Just kidding. And we finally convinced him after a few weeks of just crying, please, please leave that place, because they didn't even have masks, even before the pandemic. So he did quit, and he has had no trouble adjusting to retirement because he's got 8 gazillion interests and hobbies. And so one of the things he's always been into is photography. And when we were first together, it was before digital, was long before that. He was still putting his head under a black strap. I'm kidding. He was really into photography, and we have literally thousands and thousands and thousands of slides. So he spent the past probably 6 months going through our slides, putting them into some sort of sensible order, because over the years, we'd have a party, we'd pull them out and they get put back wrong. So he's been organizing them and sending them to this company that digitizes them, getting back the discs with the slides, and then creating books. And I've seen some of them. I knew he was doing that, but as a special treat, he collected about 8 of them without telling me that they had come, and he gave me those to look at this morning. So that was really interesting because, we're talking over 40 years ago. And the first few years we were together, when our first daughter was a baby, great pictures of me on the couch wanting to throw up on Christmas Day when I was pregnant with our second daughter. Just all sorts of interesting things. Times have changed. It was really fun to see the cars just parked along the street. Many much older cars. Cars have changed dramatically. Our town has changed. And there's one great picture. I had very long hair. I've always had really long hair. And as you often do after you have your first baby, you undergo this desire to have an easy makeover. So we went to Canada, which is not far from us. We just walk across the border, we're in Canada. And there's nothing here. So I had to go to another country to get my hair cut. Now, this is 1981. No, is that right? 81, 82. So think back, what was in style? Devo, Paul McCartney, and Linda, and so I wanted my hair cut short, and it wasn't a whole lot longer than I have it right now, which was a pandemic haircut, when I got my hair done. And we did take some pictures at the beauty shop, and it's hilarious. I had completely forgotten. The receptionist at the beauty shop was quite, they were very stylish, and where we lived, they were still doing the Bobby Sherman feathered thing and then the perms, very behind the times. So this receptionist had a very short haircut with a big swoop that was gelled up like this. And we got a picture of it. It's great. It's fabulous. So also some great pictures of me in my Lady Diana knee pants, when that was, do you remember when that was the style? Corduroy knee pants, and just exactly the kind of style I need to be wearing, ballooned legs that end with a cuff right below the knee. I looked 3 feet tall and 10 feet wide with white tights and then pumps. Not pump, but flats. Hilarious. And a collar, because I have no neck anyway, a high collar with a ruffle. A lesson to be learned: don't follow styles, they don't always suit. But let's get to our book. It's a great book. I did finish it, and it may take even another week. I'm not entirely sure. If I keep yammering on here, it's going to take all year. That's a joke, because next week's the new year. So we were reaching part 3, called Ethiopia, 1989 to 1990, the labyrinth, and we had just discussed his visit to the graveyard to see the grave of James Bruce and to talk to the Earl of Elgin, who was James Bruce's descendant. And so he met him and asked him, by any chance, was he interested in the Masons and the Knights Templar, and the old guy looked at him and said it was the most important thing in his life. So here we go, chapter 8, into Ethiopia. So Lord Elgin, the Bruce's descendant, told Graham Hancock that Bruce was involved in the esoteric and the occult and Freemasonry, heavily involved. And after this talk, Graham Hancock felt sure that Bruce went to Africa to hunt the Ark and misrepresented it so that people wouldn't know what he was up to. His paradoxical dishonesty on key Ark issues was a huge red flag for Graham Hancock. Now, it's been over 3 weeks since I read this part, and sometimes I can't read my handwriting, so if I have to pause to try to remember what this was about, forgive me. So June of 89, there was a violent coup in Ethiopia. Mengistu, the dictator, prevailed, but not before a bloodbath of all of the military brass, and the eventual independence of Eritrea and Axum was no longer under the government control, was held by the rebels. Hancock was afraid to approach these rebels, even their representative in London, for permission to travel to Axum due to his book deals with the government. He had, we'll get to later, but he made his own publishing company, and a lot of his work came from countries in Africa. God, I'm crooked. Came from his countries in Africa, and it took him a while to realize that he was being sweet-talked by this dictator and had taken him on face value. And it took him a while to realize, until he went to Ethiopia and saw with his own eyes how bad it really was. So he was able to return to Ethiopia in November of 89. He met an emissary, a representative of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, who was actually a missionary in London, the archpriest of St. Mary of Zion, Ethiopian Orthodox Church. And he had this conversation with this archpriest, Solomon Selassie, in London. And this priest told him that he believed that the ark was in Ethiopia. He said it still had its powers and it's protected by the population of Tigray. Axum is in the Tigray area. The ark had been used to win wars. It was a source of spiritual strength against aggressors, and they had used it in 1896 against the Italians. Now, are we talking a true energy source, a weapon of some kind? Or are we talking a psychological thing that gave the Ethiopians the leg up they needed to win the war? Hard to say. We're going to go into a few details here in a while. For example, the Italians had 17,700 soldiers, were heavily armed with modern artillery, and in 6 hours they lost to a ragtag, ill-prepared and ill-armed, much smaller Ethiopian force when they took out the ark. The archpriest believed now that the ark once again had been removed from Axum for safekeeping. So it's in Ethiopia, but it's not in Axum, according to this guy. So Hancock decided that it might be back in the monastic island of Daga Stephanos in Lake Tana, or on one of the islands of Lake Zwei. So he, from his reading and exploration, now knows that there are two lakes and in the north, and that I believe they're northwest, and that these lakes have figured prominently in the story of the Ark. But is it mythology or is it historical story? And he's not sure. Lake Tana was still in government hands, but barely, and Hancock had a friend in the government, and he contacted him, and he contacted Pankhurst, and he got permission and a permit through the efforts of his friend in the government. Now, at times I skip over some of these details. There are descriptions of struggles that they have along the way, the environment that they're in, the red tape he goes through, and I condense it into a sentence or two because it's really difficult to explain some of this stuff. Too many moving details. So Chapter 9, the Sacred Lake. Daga Island is one of the holiest places on Lake Tana, with a continuous church there without a break for over 1,000 years. There are the mummies of 5 Ethiopian emperors kept in this particular church. The senior priest refused to have any knowledge of the Ark ever being at Daga or Axum, and he refused more to talk about it, even after Hancock offered him money. He was paying him money, and he would only talk so much and then no more. On the way back to Hancock's boat, one monk kind of met up with them on the path and secretly told them, you should try this other island. Hey, go to this other island. And the Ark is on Tana Kirkos. So the priest there said the Ark had been in Axum for the last 1,600 years. So they're getting conflicting stories. They're getting a lot of denials. They're not being allowed to actually go into any place and look in the inner sanctums. But the story is starting to gel more and more. It's said that the Ark was taken by Menelik, and that's the son of Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, from Jerusalem, with his elders, the firstborn son of the elders, from Jerusalem on the Nile, or next to the Nile. They traveled on the Nile and traveled along the Nile to Ethiopia, to the island of Tana, and it had been there for 800 years, and that the people in that area were Jewish. Now, they claimed that it had been in Tana 400 years before the birth of Christ. And after they became Christians, the Christian king, took the Ark to Axum. So the dates are wrong. It would have arrived in 400 BC after Solomon, who was around in the mid 900 BCs. And sometimes I get confused because the BCs work backwards. So the smaller the BC number, the closer it is to our time. And sometimes I go, wait a minute, and I get all confused. So if I can, the other thing I got confused, just FYI, I said that David was Solomon's son. And it's backward, and I had it written right. I just, sorry, don't mean to confuse everybody. If something I say sounds wrong, look it up because I'm probably misspeaking. So Hancock was shown 3 ancient pillars of stone upon which blood sacrifice had been done by the early Jews there. And these are pillars with kind of a concave area where the blood was. And this priest who showed them this said that the ark was still in Axum. So Hancock was able to check at his library, and the pillars were called Massaboth, and they were exactly as he had been shown. When he looked in the books, they exactly matched the ones he had been shown that had been used for sacrifice in Sinai and Palestine at the time of the Old Testament. But this was on an island in Ethiopia. He also found reference in ancient manuscripts that describe the rituals exactly as the Ethiopian priest had described them. So now he's making an association here between what the clergy of these Ethiopian monasteries are telling him that's exactly like what happened in really ancient Jewish ritual. Also, the fact that they hid the ark behind a curtain from the common people, that was also an ancient Jewish thing. The priest in Ethiopia would have had no access to these really rare manuscripts that Hancock dug up in a library somewhere in England. So this is information they wouldn't have been able to get at the time and the place. He didn't get them in England. I'm sorry, he got them in Addis Ababa at the university. So that chapter was all about just getting to the island, meeting the priests, and his negotiating. And it's, I gave him so much money, he told me a sentence. I gave him a little more money, he told me another sentence. And suffice it to say, he still has no definite information. So chapter 10, Ghosts in a Maze. The priest said that the ark had been taken up the Nile and from Jerusalem. And so Hancock rechecked the Kebra Nagast, the book, and it said the ark was brought to Deborah Makeda, not Axum, because Axum had not even been built yet. It wasn't built until 800 years after Menelik's journey back. So Hancock's found a weak spot in this story. Menelik left Jerusalem with the sons of the elders. Somebody stole the ark. He discovered that it was with them. He didn't take it back. Solomon was the king. They get to where they're going. Where did they take the ark? Well, they could not have taken it to Axum. It had not been built yet. But according to this story, Deborah Makeda meant the Queen of Sheba's mountain. And he discovered that Tana Kirkos was originally called Deborah Sahel, the mountain of forgiveness. So he's making these interesting links. Interestingly, he remembered in Parsifal, the Grail was kept in the Mount of Salvation. And in the translations, salvation and forgiveness are often interchanged. So here we have another connection. And in Parsifal, the Temple of the Grail was on a lake. Interestingly, in Ethiopia, islands are often called Deborah, which means mountain, because they rise sharply out of a lake. And if you look at them, he was struck by this himself. If you'd get to the lake and you'd see what looks like mountains just sticking out of the lakes, unlike many islands that are a gradual incline, these just whoosh, jutted up. Tracing the description of Menelik's journey back, Hancock saw that it followed a logical course, the course of the Nile, and it ended in Ethiopia, which was the closest haven, the part of Ethiopia that was the closest haven would have been the islands of Lake Tana. So after much difficulty, he got to one of the islands called Deborah Zion on Lake Zwei. Now remember, both of these islands and both of these lakes with their islands are contenders. Similar, close in area, same makeup, would have been on the same path, same kinds of islands with monasteries and secrecy. So he discovered that the monks here spoke a language from the Axum area called Tigray. And he was told that their forefathers were on the island, all came from Tigray, Axum. And they came 1,030 years ago, which would have been AD 959, and this was exactly the year the ark was supposedly brought to Debre Zion from Axum when Queen Judith overthrew the Solomonic King Solomon's dynasty. The church on the island is called St. Mary's of Zion. The head priest said, yes, the ark was brought by Menelik to Ethiopia. The original ark with Moses' tablets, and the priest confirmed that it was brought from Axum to Debre Zion to get it away from Axum when Queen Judith attacked. They returned it to Axum 72 years later, and it's still in Axum today. That's what he's been told. So the priest had an ancient manuscript telling an ancient history, but said that a man came 20 years ago, looked at the manuscript, cut out pages that had anything to do with the ark. They could not take pictures without written permission of the patriarch, and he was in Addis Ababa, but they could look at the manuscript. They couldn't take any photographs. So they also were allowed to look at trunks full of ancient books from the 13th century. Can you imagine just sitting in trunks in a room? And he describes all this quite elaborately, and it's just fascinating. The priest delayed endlessly. He forgot where the book was. Maybe it's in this trunk. They'd go through the trunk. That would take time. And during this whole process, Hancock is in a time crunch because he's being charged hundreds of dollars to rent a little boat to get to this island, and they've already accrued hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dollars just to get there, and the longer he stays, the more it's going to cost, and he's starting to get really stressed out about it because he's paying out of pocket. And the priest was toying with him in a sense, putting him off, and he knew his best chance was to go to Axum during Timcot, the Epiphany celebration, when the ark was processed through the town. He decided to see if Jewish communities had sprung up along Menelik's route, or if the Falasha, that Jewish subculture, were traditionally in the north and closer to the Red Sea and Yemen. So conventional archaeology, their story and history, their story is the Jews came to Ethiopia by crossing through Arabia from Yemen and the Red Sea. The Ethiopians say no. They followed the Nile and came from the northwest, and that's how they got there. James Bruce's volumes confirmed that there was a huge Jewish area starting just past the Nile and in the Lake Tana area. A guy called Martin Flad, historian guy, confirmed this writing 80 years after Bruce died. So there's an historical record that this is true of people who've been to Ethiopia. The traditional homeland of the Falasha is west and south of the river and all around Lake Tana. So Judaism entered Ethiopia through the West, Egypt, and the Sudan, according to this second theory, along the trade routes of the Nile to Lake Tana. It's a logical course. And not in 70 AD from Yemen, from the north. And there you'll find there were some that came from Yemen, from the north, but they've been conflated. Hancock hoped to get into all of the rebel-held area of Axum, but Gondar was the second choice for going at Timcot. He wanted to be in Axum during Timcot. Being held by rebels, wasn't sure he'd be able to, so he had a backup plan. So chapter 11, and David danced before the ark. So in 1770, James Bruce attended Timcot in Gondar. And in 1990, Graham Hancock did the same thing. And he saw it as being a dry run for him, practice for going to Axum in 1991 if he was able to negotiate permission. He wanted to be familiar with what the normal ritual and procession and everything actually was. So Timcot is the Epiphany in the Orthodox Church. It's the baptism of Christ. It's not the visitation of the magi in their ritual. The processing of the tablet, the stone tablets, this was 100% unique to Ethiopia. Hancock saw this as an indication of how central the Ark was to Ethiopian Christianity, which is not a complete contradiction. They're both Mosaic religions, but why would the Christian church be so into this ancient Jewish thing? So he wanted to meet with the Falasha, and there were only about 15,000 of them left. There have been all these diplomatic negotiations going on to help them to go to Israel because they were claiming right of birthright passage to Israel. And they were quickly leaving. He saw villages that, if they weren't completely empty, only the women and children were left because the men had already gone to make a home. So this would be their last chance, his last chance to talk to them about the ancient traditions and the ancient culture. Hancock believed that the riddle of how the black Jews, their term, came to Ethiopia was closely tied to the mystery of the Ark. And he also wanted to talk to Quemant, Qemant, the Hebreo-pagans. So this is an interesting group of people. There's only one anthropological paper that's ever been done on them by Fred Gamst in 1969, an American. It's called The Black Jews of Ethiopia. There are only 500 left in this culture. They are, Gamst was helped by their Wambar, which is their high priest, whose name was Muluna Masha. I'm sorry, I have a hard time with these words. He noticed right away in 69 that the rivers were treated like roads. They were the routes. People didn't have built roads. They went by boat everywhere. And it just made logical sense that that would have been true in the past. And the Hebreo-pagans were relatives of the Falashas, always in the area, according to the Wambar, and had always been in the northwest of Lake Tana. They followed the ancient form of Judaism almost they practiced an ancient form of Judaism, and some of them had converted to Christianity, but they still practiced the ancient form of Judaism at the same time, the ancient rituals. It's really an interesting combination. And they worship in this will resonate for followers of Wicca and people who are animistic. They worship in the sacred groves. They had a ritual way of planting in ancient times that they got from the instructions of a dream. And the founder of the Hebreo-pagans and the founder of the Falasha were both from the Middle East. They met on a road from Canaan. The founder of the Hebreo-pagans called himself the grandson of the Canaan Anayar, who was the son of Ham, who was the son of Noah. So these people are claiming a direct descent from the Hebrews. So this Wambar had never read the Bible and talked about their religion as being monotheistic, but they believe that there are many angels, as they call them, in nature. They kept ancient Jewish dietary laws, ritual slaughter. They kept Saturday Sabbath. They had this sacred grove that also ancient Jews did. They hung strips of cloth on these trees in the grove. And in the Bible, they have a story that matches this exactly. They're considered more pagan than Jewish, but there's an awful lot of Jewish influence in their belief system. The Falasha were Jewish, but they took a long time to be recognized by Israel because they seemed to have no newer Jewish rituals, no newer Jewish approach to the religion. They were so ancient, they seemed cut off. And that's exactly what happened. They had been cut off before 200 BC. Hancock in 1990 talked at length with the Falasha religious leaders and found them to be very Judaic. The leader told him that they had been in Ethiopia long before the Christians, and then this guy volunteered without Hancock bringing it up, the story of Sheba, Menelik, and the Ark, and how they had come on the Nile. So Hancock found the Ethiopian Orthodox Church had many Jewish traditions. For example, so now this is no longer the Hebreo-pagans. So there's this intersection with the Falasha, with these guys, but now there's also this intersection with the Orthodox Christian Church. They practiced 8-day circumcision, and they're the only two cultures in the world who do this on the 8th day, is the Jewish religion and the Ethiopian Christians. The Ethiopian Christians practice their Sabbath is Saturday and Sunday. Their New Year is Rosh Hashanah. And they also do a festival at Yom Kippur, very similar to the Jewish Yom Kippur. They also keep Jewish laws of cleanliness and purity. They also keep the dietary laws. Ethiopian clerical vestments look like those worn by the priests of ancient Israel. Hancock, went to the Timcot ceremony on January 18th in Gondar at the church. And this church, like I described earlier, is large concentric layers and goes inward and inward with the Holy of Holies, the Sanctum Sanctorum in the center, which is where the Ark would be kept. And absolutely based on the design of early Hebrew temples. Why would a pre-Christian model use Hebrew temples as their church design? And you don't wear shoes inside. During the ceremony, he recognized a lot of the instruments and the style of chanting and the kind of dancing that was done, the incense that was used, the way that the tabat was covered and processed on the heads of the priests. A lot of this was familiar from ancient engravings from Egypt and Jerusalem. Many groups were dancing and did music with frenzied solo dancing. Let's see here. Page, I thought I had marked this off a little better. This chapter goes into enormous detail, and I kind of skipped over it because it's just really difficult to summarize. But this is a quotation, I believe, from the Bible. David and all the house of Israel brought up the ark of the Lord with shouting and with the sound of the trumpet, and played before the Lord on all manner of instruments made of fir wood, even on harps and on psalteries and on timbrels and on cornets and on cymbals. And David danced before the Lord with all his might, leaping and dancing before the Lord. And Hancock remarked that they process this thing through the streets, and while they're doing it, people are collecting in groups along the route, doing crazy, not crazy, but kind of frantic dancing, but that the tradition is to do it in front of these processed tabats or arks. Sometimes one, sometimes the other. If it's an ark, it's covered. And it goes on all night long. And there's a full description of it in the book. And in the morning, the procession is led by the priests to a lake. And if there is no lake, they use big containers of water. And people go naked swimming. He said it's fascinating because Ethiopian culture is more kind of repressed physically. They would never appear naked before other people and men and women. And in this particular day and ceremony, everybody does it together. And so he sneaked back to the church to see if he could see what he could see, get into it and see. And he got kicked out, and they threatened to beat him up. And he just said the entire event was like it was from the Old Testament worship of the Ark. He still thought the real Ark was in Axum. So next year at Timcot, he was going to go to Axum. So next is part 4, Egypt, 1989 to 1990, a monstrous instrument. Chapter 12, Magic or Method. So Hancock began also to research exactly what was the ark. It's first mentioned in the Bible when Moses and the children of Israel are wandering in the wilderness after leaving Egyptian captivity, 1250 BC, chapter 25 of Exodus. Let's see here. Page 276. Hang on. I'm going to skip that for a minute. And it was made by a guy called Bezaleel, and Moses on the mountain was told by Yahweh, you are to make me an ark of acacia wood, 2.5 cubits long, 1.5 cubits wide, 1.5 cubits high, a rectangular chest measuring 3 feet 9 inches by 2 feet 3 inches by 2 feet 3 inches. You are to plate it inside and out with pure gold and decorate it all around with gold molding. You will cast 4 gold rings for the ark and fix them to its 4 supports or corners, 2 rings on one side, 2 rings on the other, and you will make shafts of acacia wood plated with gold. Pass the shafts through the rings on the sides of the ark to carry the ark, so like a litter bearer. The shafts must remain in the rings of the ark and not be withdrawn. Further, you are to make a throne of mercy of pure gold, 2.5 cubits long and 1.5 cubits wide. For the 2 ends of this throne of mercy, you are to make 2 golden cherubim. You are to make them of beaten gold. Make the first cherub for one end and the second for the other, and fasten them to the 2 ends of the throne of mercy, so that they may make one piece with it. The cherubim are to have their wings spread upwards, so that they overshadow the throne of mercy. They must face one another, their faces towards the throne of mercy. You must place the throne of mercy on top of the ark. There I shall come to meet you. This is Yahweh speaking. There from above the throne of mercy, from between the 2 cherubim that are on the ark. So this was given to a guy named Bezaleel, and he had to make this exactly. And once it was built, Moses placed the 10 commandments on 2 tablets inside of it, and they were to stay away from it. Only members of the priestly families were allowed to get close. They enjoyed access to the Holy of Holies, into which they one day advanced carrying metal incense burners in their hands. So they were not invited in. These are the sons of Aaron. There, according to the book of Leviticus, they offered strange fire before the Lord, which he commanded them not. The devastating consequences were that a flame leapt out from the ark and devoured them, and they died. And the Lord spake unto Moses after the death of the 2 sons of Aaron, when they offered before the Lord, and died. And the Lord said unto Moses, speak unto Aaron thy brother, that he come not at all times into the holy place within the veil before the throne of mercy which is upon the ark, that he die not, for I will appear in the cloud upon the throne of mercy. So this is that pure gold slab with the 2 angels, and it seemed to have some sort of power. And at just a few days after his sons died, Aaron's sons died, Moses went into the Holy of Holies and entered. The prophet heard the voice of one speaking unto him from off the mercy seat. So often the voice of Yahweh comes from this thing, this box that they built. Very ancient Jewish legends state that this voice came from heaven in the form of a tube of fire, and fire in one guise or another, with and without the deadly cloud, seems often to have been associated with the cherubim. According to an enduring folk memory, for example, 2 sparks, elsewhere described as fiery jets, issued from the cherubim which shaded the ark, sparks which occasionally burned and destroyed nearby objects. So they set out from the mountain of Yahweh and journeyed for 3 days. The ark of the covenant of Yahweh went at their head for this journey of 3 days, searching out a camping place for them. So the ark is searching for the camping place. And as the ark set out, Moses said, arise, Yahweh, may your enemies be scattered, and those who hate you run for their lives before you. And as it came to rest the ark, he would say, come back, Yahweh, to the thronging hosts of Israel. And people would occasionally, who were carrying the ark, be killed by the sparks which the ark emitted. The ark might have been able to exert a mysterious force that in some way was able to counteract gravity. Several other pieces of learned midrashic exegesis also testify that sometimes the ark lifted its bearers off the ground, thus temporarily relieving them of what otherwise would have been a considerable burden. In a similar vein, a particularly striking Jewish legend reports an incident during which the priests attempting to carry the ark were tossed by an invisible agency into the air and flung to the ground again and again. Another tradition describes an occasion when the ark leaped of its own accord into the air. Was carried into battle, and an account of one such battle describes the ark at first uttering a moaning sound, then rising up off the ground and rushing toward the enemy, the ark, who were not surprisingly were plunged into disarray and slaughtered on the spot. On another occasion, the Israelites themselves were defeated. This happened according to the Bible because they did not have the ark with them at the time. So, when ye see the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God and the priests of Levites bearing it, then you shall remove from your place and go after it. Yet there shall be a space between you and it, about 2,000 cubits by measure. Come not near unto it. So they wandered for years. They used this ark as a weapon, and they wandered for years, defeating people with the ark. And finally, they got to the Jordan River, and Yahweh told Moses that he would not get to the promised land across the river. Joshua was named as his successor, and they knew that this ark could hurt them as well as their enemies. Joshua and the priests used the ark to basically do a parting of the Red Sea sort of trick and make the ground dry so the Israelites could cross the River Jordan. The people were keeping a distance, and the priests walked ahead with trumpets and the ark. They walked around Jericho, the city on the other side, for 6 days with the ark. And on the 7th day they rose early at the dawning of the day and compassed the city in the same manner. Only on that day they compassed the city 7 times. And on the 7th time, when the priests blew with the trumpets, Joshua said unto the people, shout, for the Lord hath given you the city. So the people shouted when the priests blew with the trumpets. And it came to pass, when the people heard the sound of the trumpet, and the people shouted with great shout, that the wall fell down flat, so that the people went up into the city, and they took the city, and they utterly destroyed all that was in the city. So there's rumor that this ark may in some way have been some sort of sound vibratory type of weapon. The people sent to Shiloh, this is a place, that they might bring from thence the ark of the covenant of the Lord that dwelleth between the cherubim. And when the ark of the covenant of the Lord came into the camp, they shouted with great shout. And the Philistines, who they were at war with, said, what can this great shouting in the Hebrew camp mean? And they realized that the ark of Yahweh had come into the camp. At this the Philistines were afraid and said, God has come to the camp. This has never happened before. Alas, who will save us from the power of this mighty God? But take courage and be men, Philistines, or you will become slaves of the Hebrew. To the utter astonishment of everyone, Israel was smitten, and they fled every man into his tent, and there was a great slaughter. And the ark of God was taken by the Palestinians, by the Philistines, and this was a great catastrophe. So there was a message given to Eli, the high priest. Eli sat upon a seat, and when he mentioned the ark of God having been taken, when he was told, Eli fell backwards off his seat, his neck was broken, and he died, for he was old and heavy. And his daughter-in-law, who was with child and near her time, and heard the news of the ark of God being captured, crouched down and gave birth, for her labor pains came on. And the child thus was born, and was called Ichabod, meaning, where is the glory? This curious name was chosen, the Bible explained, because the mother had given vent to a great cry of grief when she had received the information about the loss of the ark, and she said, the glory is departed from Israel, for the ark of God is taken. So Ichabod means, where is the glory? The Philistines put the ark in their temple of Dagon in Ashdod city, and next day the pagan statue of Dagon was found on its face in front of the ark. The next day, they found it once again on the ground in front of the ark, but its head and its hands had been removed and placed on the threshold. And as a result, in that area, they still will not step on the threshold to this day. The city of Ashdod freaked out that the ark was doing this, and they wanted to get rid of it. This ark had become like the gift that nobody wanted. And they took it to Gath, and everyone in Gath got tumors. They took it to Ekron, and the people began to die and get tumors, and a panic broke out, and they said, get rid of this thing. So after 7 months of holding the hot potato and passing it back and forth, they said, send it back to where it belongs. They sent it to Beth Shemesh, just inside the Israeli territory. But the Lord smote the men of Beth Shemesh because they had looked into the ark of the Lord. Even he smote of the people 50,000 and 70 men, and the people lamented because the Lord had smitten many of the people with great slaughter. No one is safe in the presence of the Lord, this holy God. To whom can we send it to be rid of him? So then a group of Levitical priests appeared, took down the ark of the Lord, carried it off to a place called Kiriath Jearim, and it was installed in Abinadab on the hill. And it remained on that hill, isolated and guarded for the next half century. Indeed, it was not brought down again until David became king, a powerful man, captured the city of Jerusalem, and placed the ark in a cart and brought it to Uzzah and Ahio. And I'm trying to make this short. The two men that were moving the cart, God struck them down, and one of them died right there beside the ark. And David was afraid of the Lord that day and said, how can I harbor the ark of the Lord after this? He felt he could not take the ark of the Lord with him into the city of David, and he carried to the house of somebody else, and saw that no future deaths occurred. So David went and took the Ark of the Covenant, the Ark of God, away again from the house that he had given it to. And poor guy, here, take this thing, let's see if you die. And he didn't, so David took it and brought it to the city of David, and the children of the Levites bear the Ark of God upon their shoulders with the staves thereon, as Moses had commanded, according to the word of God. So apparently it has to be certain people in a certain manner, or you die. And how do you account for that? So Hancock is postulating this. How does he account for it? So let's see what he has to say. He says that Yahweh was probably, maybe, likely, kind of a psycho genie in a bottle, or the Old Testament was always consistent about the ark. So let's see here. That it was always telling the truth, and that the ark was just a box, and that all this stuff did happen, but it was mass hallucination, and that Yahweh wasn't awful. Or the other option is that both things were true. And this is his theory, which he says, throughout its history, it consistently behaved like a powerful machine that had been designed to carry out certain very specific tasks, and that only performed effectively within its design parameters. Even then, like all machines, it was fallible because of the defects in its construction and because it was subject to human error and wear and tear. The ark had possessed genuine powers, but those powers had been neither supernatural or divine. On the contrary, they must have been the products of human skill and ingenuity, or if not human, extraterrestrial perhaps. So how could this have been? It was built right after they left Egypt, built in the Sinai, where the Egyptians evolved. So Hancock went to the Cairo Museum and found things that had been removed from Tut's tomb, and found that there were many objects that looked exactly like the biblical description of the ark. Saw a connection. He saw 3 caskets that were nesting and wood-lined, covered in gold, 2 winged figures. The Egyptians called them Isis and Nephthys, but they fit the description of the cherubim. Wings up like the cherubim on the ark, and made of gold as on the ark. And he traveled farther, and in 1990 at Luxor, he saw a carved stone with an account of the festival of Apet. It's Egyptian. It honored the yearly flood of the Nile from the Ethiopian rains. The rains in Ethiopia supply 6/7 of the Nile's water. Isn't that interesting? And the stone had a carving of priests with an ark-like object that were carrying on their shoulders. But interestingly enough, researching it more, this feast of Apet, they were carrying boats. And the rest of the stone looked exactly like the Timcot rites that he had attended the year before. So he remembered that the origin of Tabot, the word that the priests were now carrying at Timcot, were containers, like food-like containers, and they had referred to the Ark of Noah, the Ark of the Covenant, and Moses. And he's trying to make a connection between Egyptian boats being carried and an Israeli, Judaic memory of their captivity, connecting the Ark to some traditions of Egyptian ritual belief. Now, all of this is speculation, and it jumps around a lot. It gets a little confusing, but he ties all the loose ends up, so bear with me. So this stone that he looked at included ceremonies that took place at a river, just as ceremonies at Timcot always take place at a body of water. And he checked with a professor who agreed with him and said that the Ark of the Covenant was a copy of Egyptian stuff. And he also supported the idea of a link between the Apet rites and the early Jewish Ark ceremonies. So Hancock stumbled on something that academics had already believed, that these arks were often containing gold or tablets or statues of gods, depending on the time and the place. They contained something. The tradition of the 2 sacred stone tablets within the ark would point strongly to the conclusion that the original contents of the ark must have been a sacred stone, which was either conceived of as the deity himself or as the object in which the deity was thought to reside permanently. And interestingly enough, the name of the area where these Egyptian artifacts were found is Thebes, and it comes linguistically from the word tapat, which is the feminine of the word apet, the ritual. The shape of the arks had changed over centuries from boats to chests, but the word tabot means ship-like container. And Moses would have known all of this stuff, and he would have known how to build them, and he would have known how the Egyptians did it. But okay, so you can make a logical connection between Egyptian ritual, the Jews' familiarity with that as captive slaves in Egypt for so long. Moses was high up. He was a big guy, and he was into the secrets because he was given a lot of power by the Egyptians. So what else did he know? What about this power that the ark supposedly had? Did the solution to this, the answer to this, lie with Moses? So Hancock reread the works of Flavius Josephus, who wrote he was a Pharisee, which was a sect, and he wrote from Jerusalem in the year 1 AD. And he wrote a compilation of sources that have subsequently been lost. So he's our only connection to ancient works that have been lost, which he called the Antiquities of the Jews. And he chronicled 400 years of the Jews in Egypt from 1650 to 1250. And he based it on ancient writings. And Moses' birth was the subject of a prophecy by an Egyptian sacred scribe. And he said that the Pharaoh told, let me find the page here. He told the Pharaoh that there would arise among the Israelites one who would abase the sovereignty of the Egyptians when he reared to manhood, and would surpass all men in virtue and win everlasting renown. Alarmed thereat, the king, on the sage's advice, ordered that every male child born to the Israelites should be destroyed by being cast into the river. So on hearing this, Moses' father-to-be was upset because his wife was then with child. And God appeared to him in a dream and said, "This child whose birth has filled the Egyptians with such dread that they have condemned to destruction all the offspring of the Israelites, shall escape those who are watching to destroy him. And reared in marvelous wise, he shall deliver the Hebrew race from their bondage in Egypt, and be remembered so long as the universe shall endure, not by Hebrews alone, but even by alien nations." Isn't that interesting? So, aged only 3 months old, he's born. Aged only 3 months old, Moses was placed by his parents in a papyrus basket coated with bitumen and pitch and cast adrift on the Nile. Downriver, the Pharaoh's daughter was bathing, saw the floating crib, heard the cries, and sent her handmaiden to rescue the mewling infant. Subsequently, Moses was brought up in the royal household, where, according to the Bible, he was instructed in all the wisdom of the Egyptians. He was taught arithmetic, geometry, the lore of meter, rhythm, and harmony, and were imparted to him by learned Egyptians. These further instructed him on the philosophy conveyed in symbols as displayed in the so-called holy inscriptions. Meanwhile, inhabitants of neighboring countries were assigned to teach him Assyrian letters and the Chaldean science of the heavenly bodies. Thus he also acquired from the Egyptians who gave special attention to astrology. Reared as an adopted son of the royal family, Moses was seen for a considerable period as a successor to the throne. The implication of this special status was that in his youth he would have been given a thorough initiation into all the most arcane priestly secrets and into the mysteries of Egyptian magic, a course of study that would have included not only star knowledge, but also necromancy, divining, and other aspects of occult lore. So, he had the ability to cast spells. Now, these guys were magicians. These guys had secrets, and they could cast spells. They had magic abilities. But the Old Testament claims that these abilities came from Yahweh. But some historians, and Hancock say, he got a lot of this from the Egyptians. Moses got mad at an overseer who was persecuting Hebrews, and he killed the overseer. He had to flee Egypt on foot to the mountain of God, where God appeared to him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. And he looked, and behold, the bush burned by fire, and the bush was not consumed. God instructed Moses that he should return into Egypt in order to lead his people out of their bondage there. Before agreeing, however, the prophet asked the name of the strange and powerful being who had addressed him. This daring question in itself contained evidence of Moses' identity as a sorcerer, for every Egyptian magician believed that he who possessed the true name possessed the very being of God or man, and could force even a deity to obey him as a slave obeys his master. Thus, the art of the magician consisted in obtaining from the gods a revelation of their sacred names, and he left no stone unturned to accomplish this end. The Lord, however, did not respond directly to the prophet's question. Instead, he replied, "I am who I am," and said, "I am the God of thy father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." And let's see here, there's more about this. So in Hebrew, that's YHWH, and in Hebrew they don't use vowels. So the A and the E in Yahweh are random. They could be an O and an I. I mean, nobody knows, but it's been created into the word Yahweh. The YHWH is the Hebrew. It's called the Tetragrammaton. There is no explanation. There's no no pronunciation. They just added random vowels and came up with Yahweh. However, the deity knew Moses by name. Moses asked God for proof of his orders from God, and he cast on the ground a rod, and it became a serpent, and Moses fled before it. And the Lord said unto Moses, Put forth thine hand and take it by the tail. And Moses put forth his hand, caught it, and it became a rod in his hand. Interestingly enough, Egyptian magicians carried rods of power, a symbol of their abilities. This rod was a snake, was an old Egyptian trick, a magic trick. All Egyptian magicians carried rods of ebony. Aaron, Moses' brother, also had a rod. He first showed the Pharaoh, trying to convince him to let the Israelis go, the Jews go. And Moses turned all of the Egyptian magicians' rods to snakes, and then his rod ate their snakes. Then he turned the water of the Nile to blood red. And the Pharaoh said, oh, well, that's happened before. So then he has all these different ways of trying to convince the Pharaoh. A plague of frogs, a plague of gnats, which may have been mosquitoes or lice, a plague of flies, a pestilence that killed all of the livestock. Moses threw soot into the air, and everybody got boils. He caused thunder and lightning. There was a plague of locusts, then 3 days of thick darkness. Then he caused the death of all the firstborn, including the Pharaoh, including the prisoners in the jail cells, their firstborn, and including the firstborn of the cattle. So the Egyptians said, okay, leave, get out of here. We've had enough of this. And this became a period of danger and enchantment, during which the ark was built. And Moses eventually parted the Red Sea, which killed the soldiers but not the fleeing Jews. Hancock recalls that the Egyptian story of a magician who also parted the water of a lake to find a girl's hair ornament. I think we talked about this before somewhere. The Pharaoh was in a boat on a lake with slave girls, and one of them dropped a gold hair ornament into the water of the lake and was upset, and the magician was able to part the waters and find it. Moses was following an Egyptian magical tradition, further evidence that he had a lot of position. Sir Wallace Budge, a keeper of Egyptian and Assyrian antiquities in the British Museum, says this: Moses was a skilled performer of magical rites and was deeply learned in the knowledge of the accompanying spells, incantations, and magical formulas of every description. Moreover, the miracles which he wrought suggest that he was not only a priest, but a magician of the highest order, and perhaps even a kerheb, which is a big shot. So I'm going to stop here and start the next video. So this is the end of video 4, I think. The end of video 4. So the next one will be video 5, which we're going to start with a passage from Herodotus. And if you've never read Herodotus, it's well worth reading. A fascinating travelogue from the ancient times. Okay, thank you for watching, and I hope you'll come back to watch the next part. I hope this helps to pass the time on kind of a freezing cold, strange Christmas day. I've never had a stranger Christmas day. Usually our Christmases are full of children and presents and music and decorations and food, and I put nothing out this year. I'm just in denial, and I have this strong feeling that at least Christmas time next year, if nothing else, there will be really good, fast, accurate tests and medication for what's going on. And I think next Christmas, the light at the end of the tunnel will be viewable anyway. So I'm digressing. I'm going to upload this, and I will immediately start video number 5. So hang around if you're interested, and thank you very much for watching Slongafoil.